there should be a risk assessment and controls to any of the different types of risks that are presented with digital data. So this is it's not just about change management and upskilling your staff. If we've got experienced staff or non-tech competent staff, you have a similar risk, okay? You are creating change. Change in itself creates risk.
It strikes me that there's a really valuable role, and I don't know if you play it more widely in the sector, but just listening to some of those things around defensibility and trends, I suspect you could do some very valuable webinars for us, kind of showing your intelligence around the, what we're seeing over the last 12 months and that defensibility thinking. I mean, it ties in with a lot of the things that we're seeing from the regulator, obviously, around smarter, more dynamic regulation, more information flow, what they describe as always on regulation as opposed to once every 3 years inspection. But I think there's something that we should probably explore around some more targeted support and dedicated sessions around that. I think that's
something
really
we've been looking at, and quite, I would say, a significant part of the work that MCP has been doing over the last 18 months is really around kind of the liability dampening, but also the preparations for this new way of inspection. It's like when we went from the old sheets and everything was written down, written records, to live reporting, that kind of mindset and that element of change. And of course, in our previous episode, we talked about the impacts of the pandemic. We've got regulatory changes, we've got trends within claims, complaints and incidents also changing. Change management is really important as an underpinning concept, of all of that occurring, and supporting the workforce underneath that, as well as providers to really protect themselves to the changes that are coming ahead of us, especially with, it's not just the CQC, we're seeing Ofsted as well, and in other areas.
Lots of new regulations in Ofsted. If you're a care provider who is looking at their premium quotes and feels that they've got to find a way to reduce the cost somehow, what would you advise them?
It's a really, really tricky place to be. It's hard because what you don't want to do is compromise your cover. And we all like to think that, that abuse case or this awful instance won't ever happen. But those are the big ones, and those are the ones that you're not going to have cash flow to cover. So I think it's probably working with your broker, really understanding what you're on cover for, what you're exposed for, and making a decision with all your facts at hand, really. And as I said, not making it a transactional, let's shave, £100,000 off here. Really, really understand what you're getting cover for.
I think it's also helping brokers to really understand your business and what you specialise in. You do it differently than somebody else, and you've put certain, mechanisms in place, and you've had certain things that you've done, your action planning, or that you've taken certain operational measures. It is really important that you can communicate that with your broker within that presentation. You can communicate that with the potential insurers, because if they don't understand, this is not a one size fits all within the sector, and we have to link those two elements together.
That actually, we've been looking at some data around different aspects of the not-for-profit sector, for example, and potentially having better staffing ratios, better pay terms and conditions, a kind of more intensive provision of people, which is clearly going to be giving you a different risk profile to lower staffing intensity and potentially, higher turnover.
It's a really good point. And I think that's part of this value of having a broker that can present your stuff, because, that point about employee turnover, we are, seeing that coming through with, agency staff coming through in the claims. So again, I guess having those facts presented, which shows that you've got a really well-run business, we are in a point where, premiums are increasing. However, for those well-run businesses that have got clear controls in place, the rates aren't increasing at the same rate.
Oh, you see, now I'm feeling, your 6-monthly article, which is highlighting trends in claims. I think that would be really interesting. So there's 4 things that I want to talk about. I would be interested in trends in claims. Is there any insight you can give us now?
I think in terms of some of the themes that were discussed in episode 1, the one that keeps coming through to me loud and clear, recruitment and staffing issues. Right. Yeah. And I guess that's seen in claims and the claims received and the rationale as to why we sometimes have to settle those claims. For example, claims from employees that are relatively new to the role. You investigate and it transpires that they've not had the requisite training, or they've not read the relevant policies and procedures because it's just been straight into the job because they're needed. Yeah. It can translate into claims on behalf of service users themselves. We see claims where we have to settle them due to just ratios not being adhered to, which is incredibly frustrating because it's a sector that's just trying to do its best to look after the most vulnerable in society. So I think from a trends perspective, the staffing, the recruitment, the retention, it is coming through loud and clear from me sat behind my claims desk.
That's really interesting. So not compromising on your induction is a really important point for us all, isn't it? Okay. Digital. Let's talk digital, because obviously there's a big drive to shift the sector to digitisation, electronic care planning, digital social care records, as we call it now. Thinking about electronic medication, thinking about how we use data as well. So there's a kind of aspect of making sure our staff understand how to use the systems, but also the consequence of having much better information and potentially the challenge of using that well. So from your work with the sector, are there any observations you've got for our providers about managing risk around digital systems and using data?
I think from a claims perspective, with a claims hat on, I would say really the increased use of digitalized care records would be incredibly beneficial to a provider in terms of just defending the claims that perhaps come through the door. Sometimes you get provided with a lot of paper records, which can be incomplete, they can be illegible, they can be on occasion completely missing, which is something that I've seen twice in the last month. And it is really, really difficult to defend those claims when you haven't got anything to show. So I think if we can move towards using electronic records more, then that would be obviously a beneficial thing.
The previous risk was not having the information, not having the record keeping, not having the system that says this definitely happened. Because as providers say, if you didn't record it, it didn't happen. But once you have recorded everything, responsiveness to issues that your system is holding, is that a thing that you're seeing?
I think this kind of steps back one step slightly. If you're going from a paper system to a digitalized system, don't just think that everything will be a benefit. There should be risks and a risk assessment and controls to any of the different types of risks that are presented with digital data. So this is it's not just about change management and upskilling your staff. If we've got experienced staff or non-tech competent staff, you have a similar risk, okay? You are creating change. Change in itself creates risk. You have a period of having a new system to embedding that system. Any change requires embedding. And as an organisation, you need to kind of invest in that. So that's kind of stage one of that. we've also got to think about, what does digitalization mean for an organization? Digitalized Mars sheets, okay, are they going to pick up an error, or how are you quality assuring that? How does that work into your practices, into your policies, into increased training, and how are you using those trends and data? If we're talking digitalized care planning and risk assessments, okay, do you have a system that automatically pulls that through from a risk being on a risk assessment being reconsidered? Does that then update the care plan, or do you have to manually do that? If you're then operating a separate incident system, how are you cross-referencing that? There are so many digital solutions out there. You must understand that framework and the risks of integrating those systems, not just with each other, but the knowledge of that team, and how then you use quality assurance to do that. It's not just a kind of tick box audit system, and we've got to be careful we're not in that situation. What we also seeing, and this is kind of pre-claims, and Gabrielle will see this as well, is increased use of subject access request. Digitalized data means that it's actually a lot easier for us to do that. But then we also see issues around that in regarding not having adequate GDPR, not having adequate redaction. So if we rewind all of that, digitalization can be a massive positive for our providers, but do understand it from your organization, what risks that presents to you, what the beginning of that is, and how then you look at putting in control measures and using and embedding that system effectively, and changing your policies, procedures, training, and then the way you record as well. One thing we do a lot is help with change management. And that is how that we work with providers. We not choosing systems, but going, this is how you can put change management in to support you to do this. And so then we've got a period of support.
Do you have any relationship with the software suppliers of those systems?
We would not ever recommend one. That's not.
I mean, in terms of thinking about that interoperability.
We see a lot of providers using a lot of different systems. Some are using kind of their own systems, which they've had designs. We see certain systems used more frequently than others, but that also depends on sector. And again, a lot of these systems have different tiers that you can buy. So we can have somebody who buys this tier and has this functionality, or somebody else who doesn't. What I would say is the introduction of them, if you have multiple systems, is understanding how they interlink. And also I think it's talking about management is about understanding how you use data effectively. You might be able to run off 5,000 reports, but you can't read them all.
No,
and what are you going to do with them?
What are you going to
so
do with
I think it's a real cultural shift into digitalization. I know loads of providers who are like, oh, emails, no, don't want to use that, because we know we've got our account. We like, and not understanding the differential.
I know. Well, when we did the Hubble project and we were talking to people who we were talking to leaders across some of our organisations who were running that change management process. I mean, the curve was always expect more incidents. Introduce, expect more incidents, expect fewer incidents, because once you've shone a light on every aspect of practice, and inevitably paper misses some of that, whereas digital does less. Okay, so 2 other things I'd like to ask you about, hot topics. We talked a bit about CQC in the new world. Do you, from your point of view, do you have any relationships with the regulators? I'm thinking particularly about CQC because they've got obviously a new regulatory approach and they're rolling it out. And that data flow is going to be really important. And there is a much bigger focus, quite rightly, on the experience of people receiving care and support. But there is also a big emphasis on transparency, they say, because they're going to have an evidence scoring approach, and they're going to be using technology to flow data from providers when providers would like to give it to them. So from an insurance point of view, thinking about risk management and pre-incident prep and pre-claim prep, any thoughts for providers about how they should think about that new world with an eye to their insurance risk, their defensibility, and their their pre-incident prep, their preventative, preemptive stuff?
So we've been working at MCP with providers since September last year in exploring what the new CQC world looks like. We've also been doing that in regards to new Ofsted regs and regarding kind of supported living regulation and registration, which comes more into force while they're prepping now in next year. In regards to the CQC, we have been working specifically with providers to understand where they are now and doing a gap analysis to where they need to get to for the portal becoming live. Obviously, there have been delays with the CQC and the plan for this year due to problems with the portal. We've been looking at how we map the key lines of inquiry in respect of the quality statements. We've been looking at the scoring systems. Obviously, we are well aware, there will be a number attached to this. Yeah. I think that's beneficial, not in the scoring, but it does give you an idea of where you are on the grading scheme. We've also, obviously, in the last couple of weeks, understood a little bit more about the cap on the grading, where you're getting maybe 1s and 2s, and that will cap you into the realms of good, even though you may be scoring in outstanding, but specifically in that area of safe. What we're waiting to really see is how this impacts with the kind of southern exposure that the CQC are looking to roll out in the phase. Mm-hmm. And the beauty of having this relationship with claims, with brokers, with providers directly is what we start seeing from providers, we can then give that back out to those who are with us and say, okay, this is what we're seeing. This is how the portal's working with us. We work with specific providers who were on the consultation stage. I have associates who work in my team who are ex-CQC, who are they were part of the consultation stage for the CQC as well. So we do have that knowledge within house, which is really helpful. In regards to kind of what our underwriters, our claims team, we've delivered the same training internally as we have externally. So we are all on the same page. But there is a bit of a suck it and see element of it. Mm-hmm. And we also have our feedback from our Markel law and what we're actually seeing going on from an enforcement and regulatory point of view. We are well aware that the CQC's punitive nature has really been seen in the last 18 months. That increase in their investigations team really tells you where they're going with this. And that downgrading, again, seeing people downgrade. So we know what we expect to see and we communicate that with providers. But really, it's also about the beauty of having, 10, 15,000 providers who work with Markel and us getting that real life feedback from claims, from our brokers and from providers and from our consultants on the ground.
Okay, so I've got one final question, and this really is my final question. What would be your top tip for insurers who are wanting to do their best for the social care sector? What would you be saying to them about how they need to behave, what they need to offer to properly support the care sector?
With a claims hat on, I would say pick up the phone and listen. Nowadays, I think we're just so used to emailing backwards and forwards, and quite a lot of the time you get presented with a set of facts that on the face of it look pretty straightforward, but it's only when you actually pick up the phone and have those conversations that you realise it's something entirely different, and you can get to the bottom as to what's actually happened, and again provide the requisite support guidance by way of MCP, a panel solicitor, a PR crisis management consultant, and so forth.
Pick up the phone and get to the bottom of it.
And get to the bottom of it. Okay. Simple but key.
Charlotte?
Realise the need to understand the sector in its entirety. We have all these little trade codes that we like to use, children's homes, elderly, residential, nursing. Understand that every provider is unique. Yes, they may do a similar commission service, but really seek to understand how they do it, what their ethos is, and understand kind of that provider. Because I think a lot of the time that isn't done and we just put them, in this big bag together. but actually understand the sector. And I don't mean that just by having conversations. Do your research. Listen, go and read about what's happening in the sector. Speak again to your clients and listen how that is happening for them live right now, not what you think is happening for them.
Okay, so we've got pick up the phone and listen. We've got take an interest in your provider and understand them, because they're all different.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think just to kind of reiterate what the guys have said, you know, it is about understanding your customers' needs and meeting those needs. But more than that, it's about being explicit and clear as to how you're making it as easy and straightforward for people to understand what they're covered for. So is there explicit abuse cover? Are you being covered for that element of the risk? For example, a lot of places aren't explicit on that. And I guess, are you sure it's covered or not? That's not a great place to be. And then I think it's about also adding value. So not just from an insurance point of view, but how do you add the most value and help from a risk management point of view? So bringing in what Charlotte does for Markel Care practitioners, building in what we've got from a business hub point of view and the legal advice and the legal templates that you can use. Touching on what Gabrielle said about the PR element, you know, is there an element that if the worst should happen, you're protected from a PR point of view? They're just a few examples of kind of what the added value. And then of course, more than anything is being an expert in the claims handling and having people there that understand what you're exposed to, what's happened, that are asking the right questions and making that process at a difficult time as straightforward as possible.
Okay, so you've heard it from the Markel gang. Be really clear about your insurance offer, what's in, what's out. Think about how you can add value to the sector, because let's face it, we need all the help we can get. Know your providers, understand what they do, be really clear about the risk you're trying to manage and help them reduce that risk as far as they can. And then when you need to, if we're in claim world, pick up the phone, listen. Okay, well, I have to say, I've learned quite a lot about insurance. I've learned a lot about Markel. I've learned a lot about the distinguishing features between specialist and non-specialist. I hadn't really thought hugely about defensibility, but I'm thinking, you know, there's a little webinar coming. And I hadn't really thought about exploiting your intelligence around trends. So I might see if you'll put that in your webinar. So huge thanks to all of you.
Thank you
for being prepared to come and talk insurance. I know it's not everyone's passion, but it really matters. Without insurance, we can't operate. And, you know, insurance can help drive culture and ways of working, as you've so clearly articulated. So thank you very much to Charlotte, to Suze, and to Gabrielle. I'm Liz. I'm from the NCF. The gang is from Markel. Thank you for listening and see you next time.